Supporters of good cause eviction legislation in New York believe that a tenant is the perfect example of why good cause eviction protections would work in New York State. But when you read further into the article, you realize that she hadn't paid rent to her landlord in months. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the story of this tenant who is facing eviction from her landlord, right? And her landlord, in my opinion, has every reason to want to remove her because they haven't been paid, okay? Now, whether it was a mistake on her part or not, right? The new landlord that she has not been paid the rent that they are owed, and this landlord has a good reason to want to remove her, but they're trying to use this as some sort of, oh, they're trying to get rid of this poor helpless tenant. Well, I'm going to rip this article apart. Okay, I don't normally read articles that are so pro tenant, but this story is so ridiculous that I thought it would be a great example of why good cause eviction protections are not needed and the ridiculous lengths some tenants will go to in order to stay in a house, even though they haven't been paying rent, even though they are in the wrong, and how New York State and other states like New York will support these tenants even though they are 100% wrong. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Do you believe that good cause eviction protections are needed anywhere? Okay, now obviously there's a lot of places where these protections already exist, but they're trying to pass them in New York. And for those who don't know, what good cause eviction protections do is they make it so that at the end of a lease term, a landlord cannot just simply allow a lease to expire and then the tenant move on to somewhere else. So if you have, for example, a 1 year lease term, at the end of that 1 year, the tenant has an automatic right to renew and stay in your unit however long they want, as long as they keep paying rent. So, basically your lease doesn't mean what you think it means. The tenant is the one who decides how long they stay, not you. You could, write in the contract, I agree to leave after 12 months. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter according to these kind of ridiculous laws. Now, in my mind, that's just letting your contract expire. Most landlords don't do that. They want to keep a good tenant in there, but they what they do, and this is the trick behind a lot of these good cause eviction protections. They tie rent increases into them. So if the rent increase is too high, then that is called, like, they think that is partially like you trying to force a tenant out. So it forces a landlord to keep their rents at a lower level, or not increase their rents too much, and it allows the tenant to stay in there as long as they want to stay. Now, this is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, you're throwing rent control measures in there, you're throwing indefinite tenancies in there, and it has nothing to do with the contracts that we create at all. Let's keep the government out of our business and let us operate our business as we see fit. That's my personal opinion. So anyway, let's get into this ridiculous article, okay? And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to be skipping parts, but I want you to get the gist of the story before I get to the part that I'm going to rip apart. So this article is coming from amny.com, and it says, this Brooklyn tenant is caught in the middle of a foreclosure and faces eviction from her apartment without good cause. And the people writing the article obviously are very much in favor of good cause eviction protections, but I don't think this is a good case example of why they need these sort of protections. So let's get into it. Cami King has called her apartment in East New York, Brooklyn, home for the past 13 years. She currently resides with her teenage daughter and elderly mother and has paid her rent on time ever since she moved in. Yet she faces the prospect of being thrown out by her landlord Anyway, King, a nanny who immigrated to New York from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, is currently facing eviction from the building's new owner, who acquired the property after it was foreclosed upon. Despite making her monthly rent payments, her attorneys at the Legal Aid Society noted, the building's new owner can nonetheless force her to leave under current law. So yeah, they set up this story just great. Okay, we have this bad new owner who came in there and immediately wanted to get rid of the old tenant. Right now, I've mentioned this many times before, but there's a good reason why a lot of new owners, when they buy a property, they want to get rid of the old tenants. For example, they want to do repairs and upgrades. They want to raise they want to raise rents up to the market levels. They might want to move into the property themselves and they just need the old tenants out of there for that. Or they might want to move family members or friends into the property and need to get the old tenants out of there. But whatever the reason is, right, they should have the right to, at the end of the lease term, just allow the lease to expire and have those tenants move on out of there so that they can get their property back. And that's what it sounded like the new owners did here in this case. But, it goes a little deeper than that. So let's continue. You have a tenant who has followed all of the rules, paid rent, done everything that we asked tenants to do, and she's being evicted, said Ellen Davidson, an attorney with Legal Aid's Civil Law Reform Unit. Legal Aid says legislation named Good Cause Eviction, currently pending in Albany, would protect tenants in cases like King's. The group says it must be included in this year's state budget, which was supposed to pass April 1st and is now over 2 weeks late as state lawmakers and Governor Kathy Hochul continue to haggle. Tenant advocates say that legislation currently pending in Albany would protect renters such as King from facing such instability. So, yeah, they do a good job there of painting this tenant as this poor, innocent victim, always paid her rent on time, etc., right? And you're sitting there like, why is this landlord kicking this person out if they're such a good tenant? They've been there for a long time, right? Well, let's go a little deeper. I'm going to skip down to a later part of this story because that is where the details come out. And, they don't put those details at the beginning because the sympathy for the tenant kind of goes away. They also try to make the details out, they downplay them to make them sound, less bad than they are. So, all right. An unknown foreclosure. Kings lived in her 3-bedroom, second floor apartment at 737 Alabama Avenue, a small semi attached home with 3 units in the East New York section of Brooklyn since late 2009. She currently lives there with her 18-year-old daughter and 78-year-old mother, but is facing an eviction proceeding commenced by the building's current owner, SKZF 737 Maisel LLC, a limited liability company with an address in upstate Orange County. For the majority of King's years in the apartment, she had the same landlord, Gretchen Best, who co-owned the building with his now ex-wife, Bernice Cecilia Best, and lived in his first floor apartment until he lost it in foreclosure in 2021. King paid Best $1,350 in monthly rent for most of the time she lived there until December 2021 when he raised it to $1,400. After the building went into foreclosure and he no longer owned it, yet she continued to pay her rent. Now, pay attention right there, okay? So we see a couple of, kind of glaring issues right there. First of all, this lady has had the same rent since she moved in. She says she was paying $1,350 a month up until very recently, okay? So since 2009, she was paying the same rent. The previous landlord wasn't increasing the rents in there. So my guess is that the rents are far, far below what the market is charging right now. And that the new landlord with their new mortgage and new loans has to raise the rent in order to be able to cover their expenses. Okay. I know that's unfortunate for her living in there. She had gotten a great deal for 13 years, right? But eventually somebody had to come in there and raise those rents. Now that's just my speculation, but I'm just talking from the perspective of a landlord here. The second thing that they mention here, right, is that the property was foreclosed upon, right, and that is when it was transferred to a new owner, right, and yet it says that she continued to pay her rent. Okay, but was she paying it to the new owner? Well, let me continue, and they clear this up right here. Best failed to pay his outstanding mortgage, and the building was ultimately foreclosed upon, according to court records. It was put up for auction in January 2020 and was sold to SKZF 737 Maisel LLC for $525,000 in August of that year, court and property records show. but the sale wasn't effective until October 15th, 2021. Sometime after the building was turned over to the new owner, unbeknownst to King, she said she was approached by an individual representing the LLC who told her they now own the building or the property. King then called Best, who was on vacation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, she said, and told him about the situation. He claimed he still owned the property. A guy came a couple of years ago and he said that he owned the place, and so I said, "How can he own the place when I'm paying my landlord rent?" King said. So when he said that, I called my landlord in St. Vincent and I said, "This guy came and said he owned the house." He, Best, said, "How can he own the house? I own the house." King said she believed Best because she had no reason to doubt him after being his tenant for over a decade, and continued paying him rent after the building was sold. And now the true story comes out, okay? Now, this is a bad situation. The new owners of the building went up to the current tenant and told her, "Hey, we are the new owners of this building. Okay, we're giving you notice now that you need to pay us the rent." And she didn't believe the new owners, okay? She didn't believe the new owners, and she continued to pay rent to the person who no longer owned the property. And guess what he was doing? He's a scammer, obviously, because he was pocketing that money. He was not forwarding it over to the new owners. He was not telling the lady to stop paying him. So, I mean, basically, you're stealing the money. You're stealing the money from the lady, or you're stealing it from the landlord. Either way, you're stealing the money. So the former landlord, is the one who caused this whole situation. All the former landlord would have had to say is, "Hey, the property's been sold. You need to pay this new landlord the money." So what do you think the new landlord's going to do? The new landlord is going to evict the tenant who is not paying them. Okay? They haven't received any money from this tenant. They've received none. Now imagine you bought a property. This tenant has been up in this property for months and never paid you a dime. Are you going to evict them? I would. Okay? Now, rather than sitting here and saying, "Okay, we're going to, evict this person due to non-payment of rent," they said, "Okay, we're going to allow this person to leave at the end of their lease term." But that was their mistake. They should have filed for non-payment of rent. She's like, "Well, I always paid the rent," which she did, right? She just was paying it to the wrong person, and that person stole the money. So, this isn't a case of a bad landlord who was kicking out a tenant who always paid the rent. This is a case of a landlord who never got paid and a tenant who was unknowingly being scammed by her previous landlord. Okay, this is a bad situation, but when it comes down to it, I understand why the current landlord, the new property owners, want to get rid of her because they haven't been paid. They have not been paid at all. And once the problem was found, did she start paying them? I don't know. Well, let's continue and find out. King then received notice on March 1st, 2022 to vacate the property within 10 days or face eviction due to her lease being terminated by the new owner, court records show. Soon after that, King said her brother-in-law discovered the property had in fact been sold to the LLC, and she stopped paying rent to Best. So right there, it says that March of 2022, then she finally looked and figured out that, hey, all those months ago, guess what? The property owners, when they confronted me and said they own the property now, they were telling the truth, and I should have been paying them rent. So yeah, this is a bad situation for the landlord. It's a bad situation for this tenant, and the only one who making out like a bandit is this thieving landlord, previous landlord who had the property foreclosed and then continued to collect rent. So yeah, the story only gets worse though, okay, because they haven't been able to get her out of there. It says here the new owner commenced a so-called holdover eviction proceeding against King on May 4th, 2022, court records show. The case was heard at the end of July by Judge Tashana Golden, who gave King until the end of October to find a new apartment and move out. Due to the city's right to counsel law, King was able to get legal representation from Mangum through legal aid. But 3 days before she was due to vacate the unit, King filed what's known as an order to show cause to postpone the eviction date. That led the judge to extend her move-out date to the end of January, according to court records. Mangum said they then got King's move-out date pushed back a second time to May 15th. So basically, she's been in there for an additional year since they filed the initial paperwork for the eviction. A year. Remember, this is New York State, okay? This is so slow of a process. And as soon as they got those free lawyers in there, the lawyers immediately started filing ridiculous motions that didn't argue the point. Okay, they didn't change anything. They didn't change the outcome. The only thing it did was cost the new owners tens of thousands of dollars in additional legal fees and lost rent. Okay, and oh, but this lady, she gets to stay. She has somewhere to live. Well, I don't see anything here that says that she paid them any rent at all from the time that they filed the eviction all the way up until today. Okay, so she might have been living there for free for the last year. Goodness, this is such a horrible case, like this is not a case for good cause eviction. This is a case of, hey, we got to stop these scammers from screwing people over, okay? She should have done more due diligence to make sure that when somebody comes up to you and, approaches you and says, hey, we are the new owners of this property and you need to start paying us rent, she should have done more due diligence right there to verify if that was true or not. Shouldn't have just taken her previous landlord's word for it and then kept paying him, because that is what caused this whole situation right here. So yeah, ridiculous story. It is not a good story for good cause eviction. And I ripped it apart, showing you the truth of why the landlord actually filed the eviction, and the fact that this has gone on for so long really has hurt them badly.